Welcome to the Savvy Dentist podcast with Dr. Jesse Green, the show where great dentistry meets great business. Listen in each week as we bring you an inspiring person who will share their story, ideas and business techniques to help you create a practice and a life you love. And now introducing your host, Dr. Jesse Green.
Hello everyone, welcome back to SavvyDentist.com and to the Savvy Dentist podcast. My name is Jesse Green and it's great to have you here for another episode of our show. Now in this episode, I wanted to do something a little bit different. I wanted to talk about what's working now, and my hope is that as a result of this podcast, you'll receive some tactics and some strategies that you'll be able to apply in your practice today so that you can get the results immediately. And this episode, the inspiration for this episode has come about because of an increase in the correspondence I've been receiving. And I've been receiving correspondence from all different sorts of practice owners, and they've been, the theme of the correspondence I'm referring to is about white space in the appointment book, and particularly as a result of cancellations. And so what's been happening then is, the front desk people are trying to manage these cancellations. They're ringing other people to get them forward. And the front desk people, the team at the front desk, are really spending a lot of their time, effort and energy making sure the book is put back together after it's fallen apart. And so it's been a really interesting phenomenon because we know that white space impacts revenue. We see gaps in revenue when there's white space. And when there's gaps in revenue, we see gaps in profitability and equally a downflow or downtick in your cash flow. And that is not something that can be sustained, because if we see cash flow decreasing over time, obviously the business is shrinking. It also means that we could run into financial difficulties if we don't address that. So this podcast, really, I want to identify the root causes of what's happening and then put in place some strategies and some tactics, as I said, that you can apply so that you can either fix this problem or make sure you don't experience it in the first place. It's really interesting to understand that what people have been saying to me, I totally get. When I ask them what the problems is, why do they think that there's an issue? Why are people cancelling? Typically, they'll say to me, well, Jesse, it's because of the economic downturn. We've had all these interest rate rises and now people are finding their budget stretched and they just can't afford it. And I totally understand the reality. I get that interest rate rises have occurred. I get that some people are genuinely affected in an adverse way with this, and some people are genuinely stretched financially. But there is a counter narrative to this as well. It's not all negative. But if you were to believe the news, you'd think it was entirely negative. And news, of course, is there to hopefully inform us about the day's events. But you've also got to remember is that news sells advertising. And there's an expression in media that if it bleeds, it leads. And what that means is that negative news stories tend to attract more eyeballs. And when you've got more eyeballs, you get more advertising. So there's an incentive, perversely, for news outlets to share very negative news because it attracts more attention to their news stories. And therefore, they can get more revenue off the back of that. And so it's really important to understand that if the news is really negative, that it's easy to fall into the trap of believing that as the state of affairs. It is because the news said so, therefore it is. But it's not necessarily that. But the big risk I see is buying into that story and having that negativity become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Oh, never mind, no one can afford it. My reticular activating system is now firing in all ways to find all the evidence to support the negative news stories. And then we start behaving in ways that support that. But what I've observed is something a little bit different to that. And I want to share that with you because I don't think it's as negative. In fact, I know it's not as negative as the news stories would have you believe. And what I'm seeing is discretionary spending is still occurring. I've seen lots of people booking holidays, lots of people eating out at restaurants, lots of people going to sporting events or to concerts or going out for meals or going out for coffee, whatever it is, right? Discretionary spending is still happening. And so it's really important to understand that there is money floating around the economy. The problem for most of us, though, is that many patients will view dentistry as a discretionary spend. So as they're weighing up how to spend their money, they're evaluating or comparing dentistry with a day at the footy, an overseas trip, a meal out with loved ones, and so on and so forth. So it's really important to understand that the money is still there, but what we've got to try and do is elevate the importance of dentistry in the patient's mind so it goes from being discretionary to being essential. And we all know that healthcare is essential. We know that if patients don't get the treatment they need, it leads to long-term problems that are more difficult to fix, but also more expensive to fix. So I guess the first thing I wanted to talk about is understanding why cancellations occur. They occur because a patient has made an evaluation in their mind that with their resources, they're going to spend that money on something other than dentistry. And so, as I said, the big idea is we've got to make sure that we elevate dentistry in the minds of our patients. So a couple of solutions, a few I've touched on already. The first solution, or the first mindset, is to understand the money doesn't disappear, it's still here. The second big thing to understand is not to buy into the negativity so we don't create a self-fulfilling prophecy. But from a tactical point of view, what we need to be able to do is to elevate the value of dentistry in the mind of the patient. So that really comes back to creating a compelling reason to return. And a compelling reason to return is not just a reason to return, it's a compelling reason to return. And we've got to understand that compulsion part. And so what I would say to you is not only give the patients one compelling reason to return. In our world, I like to give our patients 3 compelling reasons to return. And the reason for that is oftentimes patients will forget one thing. They might forget a second, but rarely do they forget all 3. And better still, if we can write this down or communicate it so they've got a memory jogger around this, it's going to be very helpful. So the whole idea of the compelling reason to return is to talk about problems and implications. There's a great poem by Benjamin Franklin called For Want of a Nail, and I'm probably going to butcher it horribly, but it goes something like this. For want of a nail, a horseshoe was lost. For want of a horseshoe, a rider was lost. For want of a rider, a message was lost. For want of a message, a battle was lost. For want of a battle, a kingdom was lost, all for the want of a horseshoe nail. And so what we're seeing is this little problem and the consequences and implications of not addressing that problem. And so it's the same thing in dentistry. We know that teeth don't fall apart overnight. We know that it takes years for teeth to decay and fall apart and dentitions to deteriorate. We know that at the beginning, if you don't floss your teeth for one night, it's probably not going to make a big difference. And it probably doesn't make a big difference if you eat sweets one time here and there. But if you get into the habit of eating bad things, not taking care of yourselves, then it's easy for things to deteriorate. We know that's the case. It's the same in life. If you're going to get fit and well, it's the result of habits, positive habits over time. And so we need to be able to talk about the implications of not addressing these things, because when patients see us, they often aren't aware of their problem. They're not aware that because they don't have symptoms, that maybe they don't have pain, they don't recognize the necessity for the treatment or the urgency of that treatment. So I want to talk about how do we elevate the necessity, how do we elevate the urgency. So it begins with identifying the problem, and once we've identified the problem, we then talk about the consequences and implications of having that problem not addressed. And so, again, we're looking at that horseshoe nail and the problems, or the problem itself, and then the consequences and implications. So for example, let's just say you've got a crack in a lower molar tooth. The consequence of not addressing that crack could be that the crack propagates. Now, if the crack propagates, of course, the implication could mean we end up with a problem with the pulp, leading to toothache, or it could lead to the tooth breaking. Neither of those outcomes are very good, as you can appreciate. So when it comes to tying this into a language pattern or a framework for communication, we want to talk about the problem, then the consequence, then the implication. We want to reconfirm the date that we want to see the patient. We're going to then tell them what we're checking in about at that appointment, and making sure that we seed concern for any potential treatment that could be due. Now, this is particularly important when we see a recall patient. And what we often find where the cancellations occur are in the recall system and in the hygiene book, if you're running a hygiene system, because sometimes people think it's easier just to kick that can down the road a little bit. And what I'm trying to do is to make sure that we get that appointment booked in and it stays in the appointment book. We don't want it to fall out. So the problem might be, as I said, a crack in the lower molar tooth. Of course, Mrs. Smith, the problem with these cracks is that they can propagate over time, and that could lead to a problem with the nerve of the tooth and a toothache and so on, where we start thinking about abscesses and toothache and the like. Alternatively, cracks can lead to the tooth breaking, and we can agree that neither of those are good. So when we catch up next time in about October, what I want to do is check that crack is stable and hasn't propagated, because if it has, we'll want to jump on it before it becomes an issue. We may even need to put a crown on that tooth to stabilize the tooth. So that's an example of the compelling reason. Now, I would probably also give her a couple of other compelling reasons about different conditions in the mouth. Maybe it's around perio, maybe it's around some caries, maybe it's around a periapical lesion or occlusion or something like that. But you want to be able to have these situations, as a bit of a memory bank. So you've got a compelling reason framework for a cracked tooth, perio, caries, periodontal lesions, and so on and so forth. You want to be able to kind of have that record and just play it on command, because when you see this condition, you want to be able to follow through with that communication method. And what I've found is if you can talk to the patient about having 3 compelling reasons to return, so 3 different conditions with compelling reasons to return, that will make sure that they elevate the value of dentistry in their appointment book. And then what we're going to do is we're going to have that conversation in the surgery as we do the examination or whatever the last appointment is before the recall. And then we're going to go to the front desk and we're going to repeat that conversation, and we're going to build value in front of the reception team for the patient to come back again. So they're hearing it another time again. And the reception team will need to go, ooh, that's not great, Mrs. Jones. And that then gives the reception team the opportunity to say, Mrs. Jones, it's really important that we get this appointment booked in. I know Dr. Green wouldn't want that to slip. So we get that booked in there and then. So that's how to create a compelling reason to make sure people come back, particularly for a recall system. Now, the other thing around that, another verbal skill you can use, is what we call building value. And this could be to make sure that the whole treatment plan gets completed. It's not uncommon for incomplete treatment to be a big patient leak in the practice, and we know that leaks in the practice ultimately turn to lost patients, and that's why we want to nip this in the bud really early. But when it comes to building value, let's just say I'm halfway through a treatment plan. And what I would typically do is I'd say, Mrs. Jones, it's great to see you today. We're going to be getting started on the restoration on the lower right-hand side. Really important that we get it done because clearly on its own, it's not going to heal itself, and we just want to make sure it doesn't get any bigger. And then while I'm doing the preparation, the cavity preparation, I'll say, Mrs. Jones, I'm really glad we got onto this today because the decay is a little bit deeper than the x-ray indicated. And had we left it much longer, it could certainly have caused an issue for the nerve of the tooth, which could lead to toothaches and the like, but we've got onto it and that's great. And then at the end of the appointment, I'd say, Mr. Jones, as I mentioned throughout, it's really good that we got onto this today. I mentioned to you that the decay was a bit bigger than anticipated. It's all been taken care of. It's going to be fine. But now there is a restoration that needs to be done or a filling that needs to be done on the lower left side. And I'm a bit concerned about it too being bigger than the x-ray indicated. So I really want to get onto that as quickly as possible. I don't want that to slip. So what I've done is I've built value for the work that I've just done. And that will reduce any issues around fees. If you've quoted the fee, that's great. Or if you've given a range, it now gives you a bit of price elasticity to go to the top of that range if you need to. But it also creates value for them to come back for that next appointment and complete the treatment that we know needs to be done. And so very, very important to work through. And so this is a bit of a back to basics approach. And so when it comes to white space in the appointment book, it is really important to get these couple of things right. And what I noticed is with all the people who wrote to me, all the people that were having issues with white space for the first time in a long time, it was their basics that had slipped. And you might be thinking, well, why do basics slip, Jesse? What is it about the basics that fall away? Well, I've been reflecting on that too. And what I've concluded is that I think it's because people just get a bit complacent. We get excited by the new shiny things and we forget the basics that actually contribute to 80% of the success. So that means we need to track the activities that we're doing. We need to make sure we are monitoring how well we're building value for our future appointments or how well we're creating compelling reasons to return. We've got to create measurement around that. We've got to track activity around that. When people stop doing the activity, it's usually because they get distracted or they just kind of forget. It's not like there's been a big reason to stop doing it. They just kind of got busy with something else and it just fell over and they didn't come back to it. And that was certainly the case with the people we saw. And once they tightened this back up, amazingly, their appointment books filled up immediately. They noticed that they were able to get people in. They knew that the appointment book would stay the same it was, which meant that the reception team weren't chasing their tails trying to fill the appointment book. It meant that the revenue was restored. It meant the profitability and the cash flow restored. And it's a very simple skill to focus on every single day in your practice and track it and measure it. Now, for those people that had already fallen out of the appointment books, we did initiate a reactivation protocol around that and we're able to get those people people back into the practice before they lost that relationship with the practice. So that was very successful as well. So again, there's just a couple of strategies for you. If you're experiencing white space in your appointment book, if you've traditionally been very busy and noticing a bit of a gappiness appear in the appointment book, let's go back to basics. Let's go back to those things that we know move the needle on a day-to-day basis, track them, execute them, and you'll see that your books fill up again very rapidly as well. But don't leave it, because if it's left too long, it's much harder to execute. So I hope you find that helpful. I hope that's been a little tactic to help you navigate a bit of a tricky time for some of you, and look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the Savvy Dentist Podcast. Take care. Bye now.
Thank you for listening to the Savvy Dentist Podcast. For more episodes, go to drjessiegreen.com/savvydentist. And to discover how to build a high-performance dental practice, visit drjessiegreen.com and download the free report.